Are Bluetooth speakers any good for using them as amplifiers or as just a stereo for playing the guitar or singing or playing other instruments and using Bluetooth speakers as amplifiers? The big thing is Bluetooth speakers have Bluetooth, and Bluetooth is inherently rigged when it comes to actually amplifying things. Why? Because there's the latency. And I just put on the Anchor Soundcore 3 I have in front of me. The problem is, here is what latency is. It's like you saying something, like, hello. And then actually the other person, for example, hears the hello only like 1 second later. It's the same like, hello, hello, hello. This is also latency. Now, why is the Bluetooth a problem? Because Bluetooth is a technology that relies on radio waves. And it's not that radio waves aren't as fast as lightning or as light itself. It is, but the problem is much more the devices, I think. The thing is, every device has a certain response time, and this response time pretty much determines whether you can use it as something. For example, there are also people who talk on Bluetooth with people, but it sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't. On old devices, like devices I bought 10 years ago, like headsets I bought 10 years ago, the latency is just so big that you cannot even talk. It's also the same problem you have with a lot of voice, with a lot of calling people over the internet, because the latency of the phone system is just better. Therefore, so if now the internet also tries to do this thing, the latency is just a little bit higher, and therefore it's like, yeah, what did you say? And then the other person is like, you say? Oh no, yeah. And then, so the thing is about human interaction, it pretty much is reliant on this, oh yeah, and this, and yeah, I know. So the thing is, the bigger the latency, the better, the worse it is. Now, let's actually get into, I just did a Bavarian accent. So now let's actually get into the Bluetooth speaker itself. It sounds a little bit like Arnold, because Arnold is pretty much out of Austria, and Austria is close to Bavaria, which is something you didn't even have to know. So now, I tried using the Soundcore 1, so this is the Soundcore 3. I also had the UE Boom 2 to connect my guitar to these Bluetooth speakers. I also had a JBL Go. I also had, yeah, that's pretty much it. I also had a Marshall speaker. Now the thing is, obviously Bluetooth doesn't work, because also you have to just use the cable connection, because if you have a guitar, then actually the thing that comes out of the guitar is not Bluetooth, but a cable. So therefore, I mean, on stage, for example, it works. People are like connected over the mic, but what they also are connected to is they just have the monitors in their hand. Therefore, the latency of like the playback that plays over the concert hall, for example, is just something that is not played over Bluetooth. That's actually a good point. I mean, at least in some instances, this technology of radio waves transmitting actually sound without big of a latency actually kind of works. But if it doesn't, and in terms of Bluetooth speakers, it doesn't, because most instruments do not have Bluetooth, therefore it doesn't really work. So you need a cable connection, and guitars, for example, have this connection. It's a 6.3 millimeter audio jack, and you can connect it theoretically also with a normal audio jack cable, which is this one. So therefore, you can theoretically just connect your guitar here with this thing. The thing is, guitars most of the time have amplifiers already built in. I mean, they have to be kind of electric, so they have to have a battery in there, because the sound the guitar actually produces is not very loud. And then there are these things that just take the sound and actually send it through the cable. This is called a microphone. If you've never heard about a microphone, then, well, that's your first time. So now what you can do is you just take this thing and connect it to the Anchor, for example, which is something that doesn't work because the Anchor 3 doesn't have a audio jack in. But the Anchor 2 does, and also the Anchor Soundcore 1. I mean, it's called the Soundcore, it's not called the Anchor. So now, it did work with the Soundcore 1, and the Soundcore 1 had a latency that was kind of acceptable. Because the thing is, if this latency is too big, you cannot really focus on you playing the music anymore. Obviously, with a guitar, you have the big advantage that you play something and then you already hear it because of the acoustic sound, because you are much closer to the source, and therefore all the other things are going on, and then until the playback actually reaches you, you still are able to hear the guitar sound. That's what I'm trying to say. But now the thing is, if you are reliant on something where you actually have to listen to the playback that goes through all of these devices and through all of these cables, then it's kind of a rigged situation. Now, another problem is that these devices have different latencies. For example, I tried it with the UE Boom, and the UE Boom had a latency of at least like 2/10 of a second, for example, and it was unacceptable. I played something, and then I was like and then just like this. And with the Anchor sound card, it also was there, but it was kind of acceptable. So therefore, if you produce the music and you put the sound card, for example, like a few feet or meters away from you, then you would have like a little bit of amplification. I mean, it's not that much. You cannot really expect much from these things. But for example, the UE Boom is like a very good speaker, and it's very loud, and it's even louder than a guitar is. And this is also very nice. The Anchor Sound Card 3 in terms of sound is like on terms, I would say almost on the level of the UE Boom 2, even though this was like 45 bucks. And the UE Boom, when I bought it at least, was like usually 150 euros. And now it's like 73 for the same thing. So what I'm trying to say is this. Theoretically, it works. If the latency of this device, and it's not about the Bluetooth speaker, but it's just about the speaker component of a Bluetooth speaker, and since they often had audio jack ins, at least in the past, you just could use them. Sometimes what is also kind of useful is a preamplifier. So usually what an amplifier, for example, a guitar amp. What is a guitar amp? It's basically two devices built into one. Because for example, electric guitar obviously doesn't have a battery in there. So what the amplifier needs to do, almost electric guitars don't have a battery in there. The thing is, I mean, also in electric guitars, the microphones or the things that take the sound are just much stronger than in acoustic guitars. And in acoustic guitars, they are usually kind of an add-on, and therefore the battery in the acoustic guitars for pre-amplifying. So now, if you obviously also a cable like this is not the ideal solution, but obviously you also have to have a connection that is actually 3.5mm audio jack, at least at some point in the chain. And I guess this, for example, does not work with a USB-C to audio jack adapter, because that's probably only for charging and not for putting out video or something like this. So now, it in theory works. I also already wrote a blog post about this. It was like called I cannot remember right now, but probably something like the never-ending search for the perfect speaker. The thing is, I wanted, like, in terms of minimalism and in terms of getting things down to the really necessary things, and then being able to travel wherever you want with 5 guitars. The thing is that, first of all, I had like a very big guitar amp, and this guitar amp was as big as I never wanted to transport it anywhere. Therefore, by the way, the guitar amp is basically 2 devices in one. This is also something I wanted to say before. It's the actual amplifier and also the actual speaker. So both combined, you get the guitar amp. Now, if you just connect a speaker, the thing is that if you usually connect your phone to a speaker, the phone is kind of on a line out level. This means it's kind of an amplified level of audio already. If you now compare it to the audio level you get out of a guitar, then the guitar level is very low. For example, I tried to connect my guitar to the stereo, and I turned it up to max, and it was like only a little bit of amplification. But if you obviously took your phone and connected it to the stereo, then it's louder. So it just adds oomph, it just adds power to the signal. It just levels it up. That's what an amplifier does. So now, the problem obviously is in the chain. If you connect a guitar, which kind of requires an amplifier, just to the speaker itself. I mean, these speakers also do amplify a little bit, I guess. And they are just not taking like the pure signal out of so there is a difference in speakers. Speakers are either active or passive. Passive speakers are speakers that rely on the signal strength coming out of a line connection, for example, or out of the connection coming out of an amplifier. And they basically don't even need power, because they just take the signal and then just vibrate to to the sound, kind of, because it's actually a microphone just the other way around, so therefore, yeah, well, let's get not into the details. An active speaker, in comparison, is a speaker that has an amplifier built in. And basically every Bluetooth speaker you will find out there is an active speaker because it also has battery, as you noticed. And therefore, it actually needs, it actually has the amplification built in. Now the obvious question is, if you now connect it to your guitar, which I can't, just another round of I can't, then the problem is that the amplifier is kind of missing. I mean, this is kind of an active speaker, but it's not a very nice active speaker. And if you connect something to the stereo, then the stereo itself kind of also relies more on the sonic strength than amplifying it. Therefore, with some stereos it works, and with others it doesn't really. So when I connected my guitar, for example, the first time to the Marshall Kilburn, which kind of looks like a guitar amp, it's basically like this. It's like a very small guitar amp, the size of a very small guitar amp, and it also is a Bluetooth speaker. So I was like, yeah, how about connecting it? And it actually is quite loud because the amplification is quite good. And therefore I was like, how about I try the other speakers I have? And then I tried the Soundcore one, and it was a little bit of amplification. And that's kind of the end of the video, but here is another thing you have to consider. So the thing is, if you have something like a USB interface or a microphone or a handy recorder, I got the Zoom H6, which I can show you by pulling up an image of it on the... So this is the device I am recording with. This is basically a microphone built into a handy recorder. And now the thing is, you actually can also connect just the line in, off, or the line out, or you can just, by definition, connect a guitar to this thing. And then this thing records it, basically amplified. And the thing is now, this also has a headphone jack, and it also has a line out. Therefore, what I tried to do is, I mean, obviously the connection of guitar plus also microphone, because if you have something like this, this is basically an interface. And this is also an amplifier. That's very nice, and also an amplifier on battery. Therefore, what you now can do, and I basically made a setup like this. I wrote a blog post about the perfect buscast setup. You now can take the Marshall Kilburn. Not so much with the smaller Bluetooth speakers, because they just, if you amplify the sound even more, then they just hit a threshold where they sound like crap. But up to a certain extent it works. So what you now can do, you connect the microphone, because they also have like XLR inputs. This has an XLR input. You connect your guitar with the normal guitar cable. Therefore, you don't have to rely on these smaller cables or thin cables. And then you just connect it to here. And then you take the line out and actually connect it to the Marshall, to a normal Bluetooth speaker, or to anything else that has like a line in and actually allows you to play back audio with not the biggest latency at all, maybe. And then you basically have a buscast setup. Then you basically can use a Bluetooth speaker with even up to 6 inputs. You could even get the Zoom H8, which has like 8 inputs, and then you just get the line out, and this is a very portable setup, and you just take it, and you can connect it to basically anything, and it's already pre-amplified. Therefore, I mean, you couldn't connect it to passive speakers, like really big passive speakers, because that's just not the level this works on. It's just line out, it's not like speaker out, basically. And then you have a working setup. And that's something that's very nice. And I guess that's the end. Can you use Bluetooth speakers as guitar amplifiers and as amplifications? Yes. And if you are into music, then, but only kind of, it's kind of a compromise solution. But if you then connect something like the Zoom in between and amplify the sound, then depending on the speaker quality, you actually can use a Bluetooth speaker as your mobile speaker system. And you don't have to have like these very huge, big boxes, which cost like hundreds of bucks for a buscast setup. But obviously, it also doesn't sound that nice. It depends, obviously, but I mean, something that's like 10 times the weight and the size, obviously, can be a little bit better than something that's much more compact. Therefore, you have to decide on your own or yourself if you want to have something like this. For me, I personally just wanted something that in theory was at least able to amplify my guitar a little bit. And with the sound of this, it would be possible, I guess. It's not, obviously I guess because I don't know. But it was just such a nice thing, and then I realized this doesn't have an audio jack. And maybe get the sound card too, I just don't know as of right now, because in the reviews they said the latency is pretty high on the sound card too. And that's something that's obviously kind of not the thing we want to have. So therefore, that's the end. I hope you just figured out maybe a new solution for your setup and don't need a big chunky Fender amplifier anymore. By the way, I sold my amplifier because whenever I record music, I just record it straight into the Zoom, and therefore, why would I even have this thing standing around? I mean, obviously, when playing live, it comes in handy, but the end.